The young prisoner said, "I speak 11 languages." The judge laughed, but soon was shocked. Chloe Nguyen remained silent as the court clerk read the charges against her in the New York City courtroom. The 22-year-old had been arrested for forging identity documents, a case that seemed straightforward to Judge Samuel Harrison, a veteran with 40 years on the bench. It was when the prosecutor mentioned that the accused had created fake identities using different nationalities that Chloe lifted her head and said in a firm voice that she spoke 11 languages fluently. Judge Samuel let out a laugh that echoed through the entire courtroom. "Miss, this is not a circus for performances," the magistrate mocked, provoking muffled laughter from the gallery. "Let's stick to the facts of the case." Chloe kept her gaze fixed on the judge, showing no embarrassment. Her handcuffed hands rested on the defense table, but her posture conveyed a dignity that contrasted with the orange jumpsuit she wore. "Your Honor, I can prove it," she replied calmly. The defense attorney, Dr. James Sullivan, a 60-year-old black man who had taken the case pro bono, gently touched Chloe's arm to keep her quiet. He knew provoking Judge Samuel would not be a good strategy. "Your Honor, my client merely wishes to clarify the circumstances that led her to commit the offense," Dr. James interjected. "The circumstances are very clear, Dr. Sullivan," countered the judge, adjusting his glasses. "Your client forged documents. Period." Chloe stood up, ignoring her lawyer's warning look. She began speaking in Vietnamese with perfect pronunciation, reciting what seemed to be a legal text. The courtroom fell silent. Then she switched to Laotian, then to Cambodian. Judge Samuel stopped smiling. 40 years on the bench had taught him to recognize when someone was trying to impress the court, but this young woman demonstrated a genuine linguistic mastery he had rarely witnessed. "Continue," he said, his voice more serious. Chloe moved on to English, then French, German, Italian, Spanish, Russian, and Arabic. Finally, she surprised everyone by speaking Hebrew and concluding in English with a perfect New York accent. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the prosecutor, Victoria Sterling, known for her rigidity, seemed impressed by the demonstration. Judge Samuel cleared his throat, trying to process what he had just witnessed. "How does a 22-year-old learn to speak 11 languages?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Your Honor, that's how I survived," replied Chloe. "I was raised in different places, always needing to adapt to new languages to find work and study." Dr. James realized this was the opportunity he needed to humanize his client before the court. He stood up and asked permission to ask Chloe a few questions. "Miss Chloe, can you tell us where you learned these languages?" "I was born in the United States, but my parents sent me to Vietnam when I was 5 to live with my grandmother. When she passed away, I went to Laos to live with some distant cousins, then I went to Cambodia, Canada, always being passed from family to family." Judge Samuel leaned forward in his chair. Something about the young woman's story sparked a strange familiarity, but he couldn't identify what it was. "And why did you forge the documents?" the lawyer continued. Chloe looked directly at the judge before answering. "To help other people like me, people who needed a fresh start but whom the system wouldn't allow." "That doesn't justify the crime," interrupted Prosecutor Victoria. "I know it was wrong," admitted Chloe. "When you see children being separated from their families just because they don't have the right papers, when you see honest people being deported to countries they've never lived in, sometimes the law isn't enough." Judge Samuel felt a tightness in his chest. Chloe's words echoed something he had tried to forget for many years. He declared a 15-minute recess and withdrew to his chambers. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing." Alone in his office, Samuel walked to the window overlooking the bustling center of New York City. At 63, he had become a respected judge, but he carried a weight no one knew about. 20 years ago, he had made a decision that changed the course of many lives, including his own. Chloe remained seated in the courtroom, watching people talking in whispers. Her lawyer tried to reassure her, but she knew her situation was delicate. It wasn't the first time she had faced a court, but something about that judge caught her attention. "Dr. James, can I ask a question?" she whispered. Of course, Chloe. Has Judge Samuel always worked here in New York City? The lawyer thought for a moment. No, he came from San Diego about 20 years ago. Why do you ask? Chloe didn't answer, but something was beginning to form in her mind. A vague memory, almost erased by time, of a voice similar to the judge's. When the court resumed, Judge Samuel seemed more focused, but also more tense. He asked to see the forged documents Chloe had created. As he examined each one, his expression grew more serious. Miss Chloe, these documents are extremely well made. Where did you learn such sophisticated techniques? In a previous prison, Your Honor. I spent 6 months in a penitentiary in San Diego when I was 18. There I met people who taught me things. Judge Samuel swallowed hard. San Diego, the city he tried to forget, the place where everything had started to go wrong in his personal life. Why were you in prison in San Diego? Chloe hesitated. That was a part of her story she preferred not to tell, but she knew the truth was her only chance. I was looking for someone, a man who might be my father. I ended up getting involved with the wrong people during the search. And did you find this man? No, she replied, sadness in her voice. But I never stopped looking. Judge Samuel felt his hands tremble slightly. He disguised it by taking a sip of water and tried to maintain the professional composure that had always characterized him. Dr. James, does your client have anything else to declare regarding the case at hand? Your Honor, I would like to call a witness who can clarify my client's motivations. Proceed. An elderly man with white hair and a frame bent by time entered the courtroom. It was Mr. David Nguyen, 78 years old, who had raised Chloe for several years during her adolescence. Mr. David, can you tell us about Chloe? The elderly man looked affectionately at the young woman before answering. Chloe came to my house when she was 15. She was alone, without documents, speaking only Vietnamese and English. My wife and I took her in. And how did she learn the other languages? She has a special gift. In 6 months, she spoke Vietnamese better than many natives. Then she started studying other languages on her own, saying she needed to learn to find her family. Judge Samuel interrupted. Do you know anything about Chloe's biological family? Mr. David sighed deeply. I know a few things, yes. Chloe told me she had very vague memories of childhood. She remembered a man who spoke to her in English, who wore elegant clothes and always smelled of a specific cologne. Chloe turned to look at the judge, who had gone visibly pale. She noticed he wore a cologne with a very distinctive scent, which she had detected since the beginning of the hearing. Please continue, Mr. David, said Dr. James. She also remembered a song this man used to sing to help her sleep, an old song from the 1980s, and she remembered him saying he worked helping people solve problems. Judge Samuel's heart raced. He knew the song the elderly man mentioned very well, because it was the same one he sang to his daughter every day, 20 years ago. What song was it? He asked, his voice choked. Mr. David looked at Chloe, who gave an affirmative nod. The elderly man began to hum a soft melody. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are, up above the world so high like a diamond in the sky. Judge Samuel closed his eyes for a moment. That wasn't just any song. It was the personalized version he had created for his daughter, changing the traditional lyrics to include words in Vietnamese that he had learned during a period when he worked with Asian immigrants. Your Honor, are you all right? Asked Prosecutor Victoria Sterling, noting the judge's pallor. Yes, yes. Continue with the testimony. Mr. David proceeded. Chloe always said she would find this man one day. That's why she learned so many languages, why she studied law on her own, why she wanted to help other people in situations similar to hers. Chloe stood up again, this time with tears in her eyes. Your Honor, may I ask you a question? Judge Samuel knew he was entering dangerous territory, but he couldn't refuse. You may. Did you have a young daughter, about 20 years ago? The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Prosecutor Victoria Sterling rose to object, but the judge gestured for her to remain silent. Why do you ask that? Because I have fragmented memories of a man who took me to the San Diego Zoo every Saturday, a man who taught me to count to 10 in Vietnamese, a man who promised he would never abandon me. Judge Samuel felt the world spin around him. 20 years of guilt, 20 years of regret, 20 years searching for a daughter he had lost because of his own wrong choices. Chloe, how old were you when you went to Vietnam? 5 years old, Your Honor. And before that, I lived in San Diego with my American mother and a man I called Daddy, but who disappeared from my life overnight. Dr. James realized something extraordinary was happening, but as an experienced lawyer, he knew he needed to handle the situation carefully. Your Honor, I suggest we take another recess so we can clarify these matters, which, although personal, may be relevant to the case. Judge Samuel nodded in agreement, unable to form words. He withdrew again to his chambers, this time followed by the clerk, who carried some case documents. Alone, Samuel opened a secret drawer in his desk and took out an old, yellowed photograph. It was a picture of himself, 20 years younger, holding a little Asian girl in his arms in front of the San Diego Zoo. On the back of the photo, a date and some handwritten words, "Chloe and Daddy, last Saturday together." His hands trembled as he held the photograph. He remembered that day perfectly. It was Saturday, and as usual he had picked up Chloe from the home of Lynn, her mother, to spend the day together. They went to the zoo, ate cotton candy, and Chloe was enchanted by the monkeys. At that time, Samuel was a young, ambitious lawyer, recently separated from his first wife. He had become involved with Linh Nguyen, a Vietnamese immigrant who worked as a translator. When Chloe was born, Samuel promised he would be a present father, despite not having married Lynn. For 3 years he kept that promise, every Saturday with Chloe, helping with expenses, learning a few words in Vietnamese to talk to the girl. But then came the opportunity to work in New York City at a prestigious law firm. Lynn had asked him to take her and Chloe along. Samuel promised he would, that he would just get settled first and then send for them. But the new life in the capital, with new friends, new ambitions, and eventually a new girlfriend, made his visits to San Diego grow rarer. First it was every other Saturday, then once a month, then just phone calls. Until one day, when he finally decided to return to San Diego to get Chloe, he discovered that Lynn had sold everything and returned to Vietnam with their daughter. Samuel had tried to find them, but his attempts were frustrated by bureaucracy and, mainly, by his own cowardice. Deep down, a part of him felt relieved not to have to deal with the responsibility of being a father. He was building a career. He wanted to focus on his professional future. As the years passed, the guilt grew. Samuel married again, but he never managed to have other children. His second wife, Martha, knew about Chloe's existence, and it had been the cause of many arguments between them. Eventually, they also divorced. Now, at 63, alone and professionally successful, Samuel was finally face to face with the daughter he had abandoned, and she was in jail, accused of crimes that may have arisen from her desperate search for a family that he had shattered. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot who are just starting out, now continuing. When the court resumed, Judge Samuel seemed to have aged 10 years. His posture was more stooped, and his hands trembled slightly as he held the case papers. Miss Chloe, before we proceed with the trial, I need to ask a few personal questions. You may refuse to answer if you prefer. Chloe looked directly into the judge's eyes. There was something familiar in that gaze, something that stirred confused memories from her early childhood. You may ask, Your Honor. Do you remember your mother's name? Linh Nguyen. And did she ever mention the name of the man you called father? Chloe hesitated. It was a question she had asked her mother many times over the years, but Lynn always changed the subject, saying only that he was a good man who had chosen to follow a different path. She never told me his full name, but I remember she called him Sam. Judge Samuel closed his eyes. Sam was the affectionate nickname Lynn used for him, a shortened version of Samuel she had created in the early days of their relationship. Chloe, would you like to say why you specifically chose to forge identity documents to help separated families? The question took Chloe by surprise. It was a connection she herself had never consciously made. I think it's because I know what it's like to grow up not knowing where you come from. I know what it's like to have a fragmented identity, to be a little bit of every place you've lived, but never to completely belong anywhere. And when you decided to look for your father, what did you hope to find? I hoped to find answers. I hoped to understand why he abandoned me. I hoped he had an explanation that made sense. Dr. James noticed the trial had taken a very personal turn, but he also noticed that Prosecutor Victoria was not objecting. She too seemed to understand that something bigger was happening there. "Your Honor," Chloe interjected, "may I ask you a question?" "You may." "Why are you asking these questions? Are they related to my crime?" Samuel knew the moment of truth had arrived. He could continue pretending he was just a judge doing his job, or he could find the courage he had lacked 20 years ago. "Chloe, I must recuse myself from this case." "Why, Your Honor?" "Because I know the defendant personally." The murmur in the courtroom was immediate. Prosecutor Victoria Sterling stood up. "Your Honor, how do you know the defendant?" Samuel took a deep breath. It was the hardest decision of his career, but also the most important of his life. "I am Samuel Harrison. 20 years ago, I was a young lawyer in San Diego. I lived with Lynn Nguyen and helped raise her daughter, Chloe." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Chloe felt her legs weaken and had to lean on the table. Dr. James held her arm to support her. "Chloe, I am the man you've been looking for. I was your father." Tears began to stream down Chloe's face, but she made no sound. 20 years of searching, 20 years of unanswered questions, 20 years of abandonment had just found their resolution in the most unlikely place possible. "Your Honor," said Prosecutor Victoria Sterling with a choked voice, "I believe we need to suspend this trial and transfer the case to another judge." "I agree," Samuel replied, "but first, I would like to say a few words for the record." He rose from his chair, symbolically stepping down from his position of authority to speak as a man, as a father. "Chloe, I know no words can make up for 20 years of absence. I know no explanation can justify the abandonment. But I want you to know that not a single day has passed in these 20 years when I haven't thought of you." Chloe finally managed to speak. "Why? Why did you leave?" "Because I was a coward. Because I prioritized my professional ambition over my responsibility as a father. Because when your mother decided to return to Vietnam, I thought it would be easier to let you go than to face the difficulty of being a family. And after, why did you never look for me? Because the more time passed, the harder it became. At first, I thought it would be better for you to grow up without an absent father. Later, when I realized my mistake, I thought it was too late. I was afraid you would hate me." Chloe stood up and walked slowly to the judge's bench. The court officers moved, but Samuel gestured for them not to intervene. "I don't hate you," she said, standing before him. "I spent my whole life trying to understand what I did wrong for you to abandon me." "You did nothing wrong, Chloe. The mistake was all mine. You were a perfect child, intelligent, affectionate. The problem was always me. I remember you singing me to sleep. I remember that too. I remember the Saturdays at the zoo. I still have the photos from those days. I remember you promising you would never leave me." Samuel could not reply. Tears flowed freely down his face, 20 years of regret finally finding their release. Prosecutor Victoria Sterling approached them both. "I believe we need to give you some time to process this situation. The trial will be postponed indefinitely until a new judge is assigned." "No," said Chloe, surprising everyone. "I want the trial to continue." "Chloe," said her lawyer, "you have the right to request a transfer of the case." "I know. But I also know I committed a crime. Finding my father doesn't change that." Samuel looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and sadness. Even in that extraordinary situation, Chloe maintained her moral integrity. "Dr. James is right, Chloe. It would be inappropriate for me to judge your case. So you can officially recuse yourself and then we can talk." It was the first time in 20 years that Chloe had addressed him directly, without using "Your Honor." It was a small step toward a reconciliation that had seemed impossible just hours before. "Of course, let's do that." The trial was officially suspended. Samuel recused himself and requested the case be transferred to another magistrate. But before leaving the courtroom, he asked to speak with Chloe in private. They met in a small reserved room in the courthouse, accompanied only by Dr. James, whom Chloe had asked to stay as a witness. "Chloe, I need you to know a few things before we talk about any possibility of trying to rebuild some kind of relationship." "Go ahead." "First, I want to pay for a better lawyer for you. Dr. James is excellent, but you need the best possible defense." "I won't accept it," said Chloe firmly. "Why?" "Because I don't want you trying to buy my forgiveness. If we're going to have any kind of relationship, it has to be honest. No money involved, no special favors." Samuel smiled for the first time since the hearing began. Chloe's strong personality was very reminiscent of Lynn's. "Second, I want you to know that your mother is not to blame for anything that happened. When she decided to go back to Vietnam, it was because I had promised to bring them back, and I didn't keep my word. She waited for me for over a year." "I know. She told me when I was older." "Did she speak ill of me?" "Never. She only said that people sometimes choose different paths, and that doesn't mean they didn't truly love each other." "Your mother was always wise." "She was. She passed away 3 years ago." The news hit Samuel like a punch to the gut. Lynn had been the great love of his youth, and knowing she had passed without him being able to ask for forgiveness opened a fresh wound in his already torn heart. "I'm so sorry, Chloe. I truly am. She got sick, and we didn't have money for treatment. That's why I started falsifying documents. First to get work without a visa, then to help other people in the same situation. Why didn't you look for me sooner? If I had known." "Because I wasn't sure it was you. I only knew the name Sam. I knew you were a lawyer. I knew you worked in San Diego. But there were many lawyers with similar names. It took me years to find out your full name." "And when did you find out?" 6 months ago. I saw a photo of you in a legal magazine. I recognized your eyes immediately. But you were already in New York City. You were already a judge. You seemed unreachable." "Is that why you came to New York City?" "Yes. I came to try to find you. But I ended up getting involved with the wrong people, doing the wrong things. By the time I finally managed to find out where you worked, I was already in trouble with the law." Dr. James, who had remained silent, finally interjected. "Chloe, I think you should tell your father the real reason you falsified the documents." Chloe hesitated. It was the part of her story that caused her the most pain, but she knew Samuel deserved to know the full truth. "I didn't falsify documents for money. I falsified them to reunite families. When I saw children being separated from their parents because of documentation problems, when I saw people being deported to countries they'd never lived in, I saw myself in them." "Go on." "There was a girl, Elena, 8 years old. Her parents were deported to Mexico, but she was born here. She was living on the streets because she had no documents to prove her nationality. I created a birth certificate for her." "And then?" "Then came other cases. A father who couldn't visit his son because he lost his documents in a fire. A mother who couldn't work legally and was starving with her children. Always cases of families destroyed by bureaucratic problems." Samuel listened attentively, recognizing in his daughter a social sensitivity he had lost over the years, focused only on his career. "How many people have you helped?" 43 families. I kept the names of all of them. I never charged anything. In fact, I spent my own money to get the necessary materials." "How did you learn to make documents so well?" "In the San Diego prison, I met a 60-year-old man named Arthur. He had been a professional forger, but was trying to turn his life around. When he learned I wanted to help families, he taught me some basic techniques." "And you never thought about seeking legal help? Lawyers, human rights organizations?" "I did, yes, but the processes were slow, expensive, and often people couldn't wait. A starving child can't wait 6 months for a bureaucratic process." Samuel stood up and walked to the window of the small room. Outside, city life went on as usual, but inside that room, 2 lives were being rebuilt. "Chloe, you know that even with your good intentions, forging documents is a serious crime." "I know, and I accept the consequences. I just wanted those families to have a chance." "And now? What do you intend to do?" "I don't know. It will depend on the new judge's sentence. But regardless of what happens to me, I want to keep helping people, legally this time." Samuel turned to face his daughter. 20 years of regret had created an impossible debt to repay, but perhaps, just perhaps, they could build something new from the rubble of the past. "Chloe, I would like to propose something to you." "What?" "How about we work together to help these families, but within the law?" "How so?" "I know lawyers specialized in immigration law. I know organizations that work with refugee documentation. I know judges who are sensitive to family reunification cases. We can create a legal support network." Chloe looked at her father with a mixture of hope and distrust. It was exactly what she had always wanted to do, but her experience with broken promises made her cautious. "Why would you do this?" "Because it's the only way I can think of to begin to make up for 20 years of absence. Because it's the only way to honor your mother's memory. And because it's the right thing to do. And if I'm sentenced to prison, then I will wait for you to get out. And when you get out, we'll be ready to begin." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Dr. James observed the conversation between father and daughter with emotion. In 40 years of law practice, he had witnessed many reconciliations, but none as unlikely and touching as this one. "Chloe," he said, "I think you both need time to process all this. The trial will be rescheduled for 2 weeks from now. That gives us time to prepare a more robust defense considering all this new information." "Dr. James," said Samuel, "I would like to contribute to Chloe's defense, but she has made it clear she doesn't want my money. Is there anything I can do?" "Actually, yes. You could testify as a character witness. Your position as a respected judge could positively influence the new magistrate." "I will do that, but I want it to be clear that I am not trying to use my influence inappropriately. I will testify only about what I know of Chloe as a person." Chloe interrupted. "Dad..." The word came out naturally, and all three were surprised by it. "Sorry, I meant Samuel. You can call me Dad, Chloe, if you want." "Dad, I need time to understand all of this. Spending 20 years imagining a meeting with you, and when it finally happens, it's in a courtroom with you being my judge. It's a lot to process." "I understand perfectly. There's no rush for anything. But I would like to know more about you, about who you've become in these 20 years. And I would like to know about you too, about all the things I missed by not being present." Dr. James smiled. "I believe you two have a lot to talk about. How about we schedule a meeting next week to discuss the defense strategy? That will give you time to get to know each other better." They agreed to the proposal. Samuel offered to walk Chloe to the exit of the courthouse, but she preferred to go alone, still needing to process everything that had happened. "Chloe," Samuel called when she was already at the door. "Yes?" "Thank you for giving me a chance to explain." "Thank you for finally explaining." That night, Samuel stayed late in his chambers, remembering the day's events. He called his ex-wife Martha, who had always encouraged him to look for Chloe, and told her about the unexpected meeting. "Samuel," said Martha on the other end of the line, "this is the chance you've waited 20 years for. Don't ruin it again." "I know, but I'm afraid of hurting her again." "Then don't hurt her. Be the father you should have been 20 years ago." Chloe, for her part, returned to the small apartment she shared with 2 other immigrants in Chinatown. They noticed something had changed in her, but Chloe wasn't ready to share the story yet. During the following week, father and daughter met 3 times. First at a cafe near the courthouse, where they talked for 4 hours about the lost years. Samuel talked about his career, his regrets, his failed relationships. Chloe talked about her life in Vietnam, in Laos, in Cambodia, about how she had learned each language, about the difficulties she had faced. On the second meeting, Samuel took Chloe to the Bronx Zoo. It was an attempt to recreate the good memories they both had of San Diego. Chloe was moved to see her father choosing the same kinds of animals to visit, making the same funny comments she vaguely remembered from childhood. On the third meeting, Chloe took Samuel to meet some of the families she had helped with the forged documents. He was impressed to see how these people treated her as if she were a daughter, how grateful they were for the help they had received. "Chloe," he said after meeting the family of Elena, the Mexican girl, "I understand now why you did what you did. You do. These people had no other choice. The system abandoned them, just like I abandoned you. It's not the same thing, Dad. Yes, it is. When the institutions that should protect fail, people need to find other ways to survive. During these meetings, they discovered they had more similarities than they imagined. They both liked history books. They both had the habit of making mental lists when nervous. They were both stubborn and determined when they believed in a cause. Samuel discovered that Chloe had studied law by correspondence during her years abroad, always hoping she could work legally in the United States when she returned. She knew a lot about immigration legislation and human rights. Chloe discovered that her father had spent the last 10 years doing volunteer work on weekends, helping needy people with basic legal issues. It was as if they had both developed the same sense of social justice, each in their own way. When the day of the new trial arrived, both were emotionally more prepared to face the situation. The newly assigned judge was Dr. Christopher Brooks, known for his sensitivity to cases with a social dimension. The prosecution maintained its charges, but Dr. James had prepared a solid defense based on the humanitarian nature of Chloe's actions and the personal circumstances that led her to commit the crimes. Samuel testified as a character witness, recounting everything he had discovered about his daughter in the last 2 weeks. His testimony was moving and honest, without attempting to minimize the gravity of the crimes, but contextualizing the motivations behind them. "Your Honor," said Samuel, "Chloe committed serious crimes, that is undeniable, but she committed them out of a sense of justice that our society often fails to provide. She saw children going hungry while awaiting bureaucratic processes that could take years." "And does that justify the falsification of documents?" asked Judge Christopher. "It doesn't legally justify it, but it explains it on a human level. Chloe chose to help people in vulnerable situations because she herself had been through that situation. She transformed her personal pain into compassion for others." The testimony of Mr. David was also crucial. The elderly Vietnamese man told how Chloe had arrived at his home at 15, not speaking English well, but with an impressive determination to rebuild her life. "She worked during the day, studied at night, and on weekends she helped other immigrants arriving in our community," reported Mr. David. "Chloe never asked anyone for anything, but she always offered help to those in need." Several of the families who benefited from Chloe's documents also went to court to testify in her favor. Elena, the Mexican girl who was now 12, asked to speak directly to the judge. "Your Honor," said the girl in a firm voice, "if it weren't for Chloe, I would still be on the streets today. My parents were deported when I was 8, but I was born here. Chloe gave me the papers that proved I'm American." "And now where do you live?" asked Judge Christopher. "With a family that legally adopted me, but they were only able to adopt me because I had the documents that Chloe made." The most impactful testimony came from Mrs. Martha, a 65-year-old woman from El Salvador who had arrived in the United States, fleeing the economic crisis in her country. "Your Honor," said Mrs. Martha with tears in her eyes, "I arrived here with nothing. My husband had passed away and my children were scattered across other countries. Chloe gave me the documents that allowed me to work legally and bring my grandchildren here." "Did you know the documents were falsified?" asked Prosecutor Victoria Sterling. "Yes, I did, and I know it was wrong. But my grandchildren were going hungry in El Salvador. Sometimes you have to choose between the law and life. And today, what is your situation?" "Today I have a steady job. My grandchildren are in school, and we are legalized. We managed to regularize everything through a government program that Chloe helped us find." Judge Christopher listened to all the testimonies carefully. It was clear that Chloe had committed crimes, but it was also clear that her motivations were genuinely humanitarian. During her final testimony, Chloe appeared serene and took full responsibility for her actions. "Your Honor, I knew I was committing crimes. I will not plead ignorance nor attempt to minimize my actions. I falsified official documents, and that is serious. Why did you do it, knowing the consequences? Because I believed there were situations where helping a child not go hungry was more important than following bureaucracy. Perhaps I was wrong, but at the time it seemed like the only option." "And if you were released today, would you do it again?" Chloe thought carefully before answering. "Not in the same way. I now know there are legal ways to help these people. My father showed me organizations that work on these cases within the law." "Your father?" Mr. Samuel Harrison, who testified here today. We reunited after 20 years apart during my first trial. And that changed your perspective. It changed everything. It made me understand that I can use my language skills and my experience to help people legally. I can work as a translator for humanitarian organizations. I can help immigrants understand their rights. I can be a bridge between cultures without breaking the law. Judge Christopher Brooks withdrew to deliberate. 2 hours later, he returned with his sentence. The defendant, Chloe Nguyen, has committed serious crimes against public trust. Document forgery is an offense that cannot be tolerated, regardless of the motivations. Chloe lowered her head, preparing for the worst. However, the judge continued, the specific circumstances of this case, the humanitarian nature of the defendant's actions, her full cooperation with the justice system, and the proven positive impact of her actions on the lives of dozens of families lead me to apply an alternative sentence. Chloe looked up, surprised. I sentence Chloe Nguyen to 2 years of community service, working as a translator and assistant in organizations that help immigrants and refugees. Furthermore, I order that she must report to the court monthly during this period. Additionally, the judge continued, I recommend that the defendant be hired by an official organization so she can use her language skills and experience in a constructive and legal manner. Chloe stood up, still processing the sentence. She was not going to prison, but she would have to prove she could channel her desire to help others in the proper way. Chloe, said Judge Christopher Brooks, your case taught me something important. Sometimes people break the law not out of malice, but because the system failed first. I hope you use this second chance to show it's possible to make a difference by following the right path. Thank you very much, Your Honor. I promise I won't waste this opportunity. Samuel, who had watched everything from the gallery, approached his daughter as soon as she left the courtroom. How are you feeling? Relieved, grateful, and determined to prove I deserve this second chance. And about our conversation last week, about working together, Chloe smiled. I think we now have a real opportunity to make that happen. In the following weeks, Samuel used his contacts to secure a position for Chloe at a non-governmental organization working with refugee rights. She would be an official translator and would also help families understand the legal documentation processes. The work was perfect for Chloe. She could use all 11 of her languages. She could help people in situations similar to what she herself had lived through, and she could do everything within the law. Samuel, in turn, began dedicating more time to volunteer work. He created a program where experienced lawyers offered free consultations for documentation and family reunification cases. Father and daughter began working together on complex cases, where Samuel's legal experience combined with Chloe's linguistic and cultural knowledge. The first case they solved together was that of a Syrian family that had arrived in the United States as refugees. The father spoke only Arabic, the mother spoke Arabic and French, and the children spoke Arabic and English. They needed to regularize their status, but couldn't understand the bureaucratic procedures. Chloe served as a translator and cultural guide, explaining not just the words, but also the legal and social concepts of the United States. Samuel Harrison advised on the legal aspects and oversaw the entire documentation process. Within 3 months, the Syrian family was fully legalized, and the children were enrolled in school. It was the first of many cases that father and daughter would resolve together. During this period, the relationship between Chloe and Samuel also grew stronger. They maintained a weekly dinner, always on a Thursday, where they talked about work, but also about their personal lives. Samuel talked about his failed relationships, about how his guilt toward Chloe had sabotaged all his attempts to start a new family. Chloe spoke about the countries where she had lived, about the people who had helped her, about the difficult times and the moments of joy. Gradually, they built a new dynamic in their relationship. They were no longer the young father and the little daughter from 20 years ago, but 2 adults who shared blood, history, and now also a common mission. Chloe never called Samuel Daddy as she did in childhood, but the father she used carried genuine affection. Samuel never tried to recover the lost time, but invested in building a solid future with his daughter. 6 months after the trial, they had helped over 100 families resolve documentation issues. The organization where Chloe worked was recognized by the federal government as a model for immigrant services. Samuel decided to retire early to dedicate himself fully to social work. At 64, he felt he had finally found the purpose he had lost when he abandoned Chloe. "Father," said Chloe during one of their Thursday dinners, "I have a proposal for you." "What kind of proposal?" "How about we create our own organization? Something focused specifically on international family reunification?" Samuel stopped eating and looked intently at his daughter. "Are you serious?" "Completely. We have complementary knowledge, we have the experience, we have the contacts. And most importantly, we have the personal motivation. It would be difficult work. Family reunification cases are complex, involving multiple countries, multiple legal systems. I know. But I also know there are many separated families who need specialized help, families like ours once were." Samuel reached across the table and touched his daughter's hand. "Chloe, it would be an honor to work with you on this project." They spent the following months planning the new organization. They decided to call it Family Bridges, a reference both to the bridges Chloe had built between cultures through languages and to the bridge they themselves had rebuilt between each other. The organization would offer free services for locating separated family members, legal guidance for reunification processes, specialized translation of family documents, and psychological support for people who had lost contact with their families. To fund the project, Samuel used his retirement savings, and Chloe organized fundraising events in the immigrant community where she was well known. The first Family Bridges office was opened in Chinatown, in the heart of New York City's Asian community. It was a small but functional space with a reception room, a translation room, and a small archive for documents. On the opening day, all the families Chloe had helped over the years attended, along with Samuel's colleagues from the judiciary, members of the immigrant community, and representatives from other humanitarian organizations. Mrs. Martha, the Salvadoran lady, gave an emotional speech. Chloe and her Samuel represent the best of humanity. They transform their own pain into instruments of healing for other families. Elena, the Mexican girl who was now 13 years old, also spoke. "Chloe taught me that family isn't just who you're born with, but also who you choose to stay with. She and her father chose to stay together and chose to help us too." The first official case for Family Bridges was an 80-year-old Laotian woman who had lost contact with her son during the Second World War. She only knew that he had emigrated to the United States in the 1950s, but had no information about his current whereabouts. Chloe used her contacts in the Laotian community and her language skills to track old immigration records. Samuel used his contacts in the judicial system to access historical archives. After 3 months of investigation, they discovered that the woman's son had moved to upstate New York, had married an American woman, and had 5 children. He was already 75 years old and was also looking for his mother. The reunion took place at the Family Bridges office, mediated by Chloe, who served as translator. Mother and son hugged each other crying, surrounded by grandchildren who had never met their Laotian grandmother. "That's it," Samuel said to Chloe after the family had left. "This is why we're here. To reunite people who got lost along the way," Chloe completed. "Like we got lost and found each other." By the end of the first year of operation for Family Bridges, they had reunited 17 separated families, helped over 200 people with documentation issues, and trained other professionals to replicate their service model in other cities. Chloe had completed her community service period with distinction and was now recognized as an expert in immigrant rights. She gave lectures at universities about the importance of social inclusion and the challenges faced by people who grow up between cultures. Samuel found in Family Bridges the professional fulfillment he had lost in his later years as a judge. He felt he was finally using his legal knowledge for causes that truly mattered. The relationship between father and daughter had also matured. They weren't trying to recreate a lost childhood, but had built an adult partnership based on mutual respect, shared goals, and genuine love. Chloe still lived in her small apartment in Chinatown, but now had dinner at Samuel's house every Sunday. He had learned to cook a few Vietnamese dishes in honor of Lin's memory and his daughter's cultural heritage. Samuel also began studying Vietnamese, using apps and online classes. His pronunciation was terrible, but Chloe appreciated the effort and always corrected him with patience and affection. One Sunday night, after a particularly successful yakisoba dinner, Chloe asked a question she had wanted to ask for months. "Dad, do you still feel guilty about those 20 years?" Samuel stopped washing the dishes and turned to face his daughter. "Every day." "But has the guilt lessened?" "Yes. Not because what I did became less serious, but because now I know I'm doing something to make up for it. You know you don't need to make up for anything with me, right? I've already forgiven you." "I know. But I need to make up for it with myself. I need to prove to myself that I can be the father I should have been 20 years ago." Chloe approached and hugged Samuel from behind as he finished washing the dishes. "Dad, you're already the father I need now. Don't try to be the father I needed at 5 years old. Try to be the father your adult daughter needs today. And what kind of father does your adult daughter need? A father who is a partner, who is a friend, who is an advisor when I ask for advice, who is a constant presence without being intrusive, a father who lets me take care of him too once in a while." Samuel turned in his daughter's arms and hugged her back. "I think I can be that kind of father." "I know you can. You already are." 2 years after the launch of Family Bridges, the organization had expanded to 3 cities: New York City, Rio de Janeiro, and Brasilia. Chloe coordinated operations in New York City, while Samuel supervised the legal aspects of all units. They had developed an innovative protocol for family reunification cases that was being studied by universities and replicated by other organizations in the United States and abroad. Chloe had been invited to join a United Nations Committee on Immigrant Rights, a recognition of her expertise in the field. Samuel had received an award from the National Bar Association for the social work he was doing. But for both, the greatest achievement was not the professional recognition. It was the fact that they had managed to turn a story of abandonment and separation into a story of reunion and shared purpose. On a Thursday afternoon, Chloe received a call that would once again change the course of their lives. It was from an international human rights organization, inviting her to coordinate a global family reunification project. "It would be a 3-year assignment," explained the person on the other end of the line. "You would travel the world helping to establish family reunification protocols in countries receiving large flows of refugees." Chloe was silent for a moment. It was the dream professional opportunity, the chance to use her language skills and her experience on an international scale. But it would also mean leaving the United States, leaving Family Bridges, leaving the father she had reunited with just a few years earlier. "Can I have some time to think?" "Of course, but we need an answer in 2 weeks." That night, during their Thursday dinner, Chloe told Samuel about the proposal. He listened in silence, without interrupting, processing the implications of the opportunity. "It's a unique chance," he said when she finished explaining. "It is, but it also means leaving everything we've built here. Chloe, you can't make professional decisions based on me. You've already lost many years of your life because of my wrong choices. It's not just because of you, Dad, it's because of us. It's because of Family Bridges. It's because of all the families we're still going to help." Samuel stood up and went to the living room window. Outside, New York City maintained its frantic pace, indifferent to the personal dilemmas unfolding in apartments and houses scattered across its vastness. "Chloe, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "When I was your age, I got a similar offer. It was to work at an international law firm. I accepted without a second thought because I thought it was the chance of a lifetime." "And was it?" "Professionally, yes. Personally, it was the beginning of the end for my family. It was because of that job that I started neglecting you and your mother." Chloe moved closer to her father. "But the situation is different now." "Is it?" "Yes. You weren't 22 when you got that offer. I'm 24. You didn't know who you were or what you wanted from life. I know exactly who I am and what I want. And what do you want? I want to make a difference in the lives of separated families. I want to use my languages to connect people, and I want to have you as a partner in that mission." Samuel turned to face his daughter. "So what's the dilemma?" "The dilemma is that I can do all of that here in the United States with you, or I can do it on a global scale, but alone." "Who said you'd be alone?" Chloe didn't understand the question. "What do you mean?" "Chloe, I'm 66, I'm retired. I have no other responsibilities besides family bridges. If you accept this offer, I can go with you." "Dad, you would leave everything here to come with me?" "I gave up everything once to chase a selfish ambition. Why wouldn't I give up everything now to support my daughter on a humanitarian mission? But family bridges, it can keep running under the supervision of Dr. James and the team we trained. And when we return in 3 years, we'll have international experience to expand the work even further." Chloe looked at her father with tears in her eyes. 24 years after being abandoned by him, Samuel was offering to accompany her on a journey that would take them far from everything familiar and safe. "Would you really do that?" "Chloe, I spent 20 years running from my responsibilities as a father. Now I want to spend the rest of my life making up for it. If that means traveling the world helping other families reunite, then that's what we'll do. And what if it goes wrong? What if we can't work together outside the United States? Then at least we tried, and at least we tried together." Chloe hugged her father tightly. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, daughter. And this time, I promise I will be there for every important moment of your life. You don't need to make promises anymore. You just need to keep being who you are now. So that's it. So, are we accepting the proposal?" "We're accepting the proposal." The next morning, Chloe called the international organization and accepted the invitation, on the condition that her father could accompany her as a volunteer legal consultant. The organization was even more interested with Samuel's inclusion due to his experience in the American judicial system. End of story. So, what did you think of this story of a father and daughter reuniting? Do you think Chloe made the right decision to accept working internationally alongside her father? Do you believe it's possible to rebuild family bonds after so much time apart? Tell us in the comments which part of the story moved you the most and where you're watching from. Your opinion is very important to us. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories like this one.